The RTE Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury, proud official kit suppliers to the Irish men and women's rugby teams.
And you're very welcome to the RTE Rugby Podcast after the second round of the United Rugby Championship. Pretty decent weekend for the provinces. I think you'll all agree, with victories for Leinster, Munster, Ulster and Connacht in reverse order. Delighted to say we have Fiona Hayes, Donal Lennon and Wesley Liddy with us for the podcast. You're all welcome, guys. Donal, I guess we should start with the performance really of the weekend, which was Connacht on Friday night against the Bulls. This Bulls side who we were expecting to promise a lot, even in the course of the early stages of this season, but it's 2 defeats from 2 games now, to take nothing away from Connacht, who were excellent, Donal, scored some brilliant tries.
Yeah, I must say it was a fantastic match, game of the weekend, as you said. Sat down Friday evening, not really sure what to expect because Connacht, we saw patches of them in the opening game against Cardiff, but, they ended up losing that game. The Bulls, strongest of the 4 South African sides, newly crowned Currie Cup champions. They have been on the road a while, so therefore, they're battle-hardened. Connacht still finding their feet. After 4 or 5 minutes, when the Bulls opened with a try, you felt, oh God, is this going to be a long night for Connacht? But, it was a brilliant night in Galway. Weather was perfect. And I thought Connacht were outstanding. Brilliant to watch. A great mix of, against the Bulls in particular, you got to be physical up front. They matched that. Their set piece was superb. But just the variety of their attacking game and their ability, I thought their passing was outstanding throughout. And, when you look at the number of players that they have to come back into the side, given the overall quality of their performance, I think they're in a really good place. They play a fantastic brand of rugby. I think all of us here on this podcast certainly have been admirers of Andy Friend since he's come into Galway, really. He's had to work with one hand tied behind his back a lot of the time, but he's built a decent squad. He's been brilliant in terms of sourcing players from overseas who aren't household names. But he always seems to unearth a few gems, and it looks as if the sports ground have a new hero, Mac Hansen. What a try, what a way.
Right, wasn't bad, was it?
The clan stand. I mean, if you're going to do it, if you're going to introduce yourself, he does it in the modern game, and all the wingers seem to be 6'4" and 17 stone. This fella looks slight. He has the white scrum cap on him. He almost looks like an amateur rugby player in many ways. So I thought it was brilliant to see the way he turned a poor kick into an outstanding try. It would have been a travesty had it been disallowed. There was a suggestion of interference. I was hoping and praying that it wouldn't be, but I think it was symptomatic of Connacht's night. They were brilliant overall, fantastic to watch, and let's hope they can build from this.
Wes, I don't know whether Jake White was having a very easy week of it and he just wanted to give himself an extra challenge, or whether he thought it was a good idea in his pre-match interview to say that, Connacht are the discards of Irish rugby, and they just lap up really whoever doesn't get contracts at Leinster and Munster, come down here for a bit of crack. Maybe some of what he said is slightly true, but certainly as regards pre-match motivation, I thought it was quite something for the head coach of the opposition team to say.
Well, he said it's so close to kick-off, I don't even think it served the purpose pre-match motivation-wise. If he'd have said it during the week, maybe, but I don't know what he was thinking, really. He's just talking rubbish. I don't know, there was kind of a touch of sour grapes with him. I don't know, I wouldn't be taking too much notice of it, but I suppose he'd be better served looking at his own team's performances.
I wonder, Wes, did it set the tone for the Bulls in their match? And if that's what he was thinking just before kickoff, was that the tone set for the week that we're the Bulls here, we're Currie Cup champions, we're coming down to this bit pot team here, and did they just not give Connacht the respect they deserve, perhaps, and that maybe set the tone? Yeah,
you could argue that, but they did actually start well. I suppose, first of all, with Connacht, I suppose there was the feel of the first kind of proper occasion this season in terms of the atmosphere and the crowd, and they seemed to kind of, it was obviously reminiscent of a lot of the big European days they've had, and visiting touring teams and things like that. With regards to the Bulls, again, not to take from Connacht, but you're talking about the most successful team in Northern Hemisphere history, or Southern Hemisphere history, bar the Crusaders. You're talking, they've had a huge cash injection by South African standards lately, World Cup winning coach. It's shocking, really, how poor they've been. There probably are reasons with how long they've been on the road, like what Donald said, and there's some Springboks missing, not that many. But when you kind of contrast what you see South Africa do in a classic game at the weekend and the fare we've been served up here, it's I don't know, it's kind of maybe we weren't quite given due recognition to just how denuded of strength South African rugby has been to losing players internationally, that it's not just some of the top Springboks, but that it's layers 2 and 3 right across the board. And Birch made a good point in his article at the weekend that any financial gain from this venture, which there probably isn't a huge one from URC participation, but maybe ultimately, as Donald said last week, it paves the way for Six Nations inclusion or World League inclusion, as was mooted a while back. There's financial gain for South African Union then, but maybe right now the goal is to be in a strong enough position that, like, the ship has sailed with regards to keeping a lot of top Springboks, but maybe it's that you're not losing that layer of 18, 19-year-old promising schoolboys, and you build from there. Like guys like Keenan Knox, for example, we've seen in this country. That's a trend right across Europe, especially in France, that there's such depth in South African rugby at schoolboy level that they're losing the next generation as well as this one. So it's a bit of a puzzle to be solved, I think, for the Bulls and for all the franchises, really.
And I guess, look, to focus on Connacht as well, Fiona, and what they're doing at the moment. Donald mentioned there, like Donald said to me, we were doing the Munster game on Saturday night. At one stage, Munster scored their 5th try, and Donald said to me, on the match, that's the 5th try, all scored by forwards. Connacht's tries were all scored by their backs, which I think is indicative of how they play the game.
Yeah, it was a really exciting game to watch. I watched it myself, and I think it's exactly what the lads said. I think you could feel the sense of the home game, the crowd cheering them on. For me, when I watched it, I had given him a bit stick last week saying he was a bit quiet, but Tom Daly was an absolute workhorse for the whole game. I just thought he worked his socks off, and obviously he got his 2 tries, but he was just everywhere, and he seems to be really coming into himself, and he's probably we don't talk about him enough, I don't think. And when I watched that game, I just thought what he did and how he organised everyone else around him at times as well was brilliant. And great to see Tiernan O'Halloran on the score sheet as well.
Donald, the 5 tries scored by backs thing for me is interesting with Connacht. Just I guess to focus on it for a second, because that implies that if Jack Carty is on his game, and this is something we've spoken about before, if Jack Carty is on his game, Connacht will fire and they'll score tries, and they have the ability to play because he's so, I guess, crucial to everything that they do. But if he's not, Connacht tend to suffer as a result. I don't want to oversimplify it, but certainly you could tell on Friday night that that Connacht were under straps, and the number 10 had a large part to do with that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And look, it wasn't as if he was flawless. He had a ball that went out in the full, and but I think he's at a stage in his career where he knows how good he is himself. He's tasted international rugby. He's had some highs and some lows. I mean, he started that game against Japan in the World Cup, had a very good first half as it happened. But obviously, the way the game progressed, he seems to have been a big loser from that. Hadn't been involved in the games over the summer when Andy Farrell brought in a lot of the younger players, if you like. But you're right, and I think Kieran Marmion has a battle in Connacht at scrum half with Caelan Blade, and I thought Marmion and Carty were outstanding the other night. It's just the variety of his play. He's not afraid to take the ball flat. He's not afraid to take the hits and feed other players into it. And then, as Fiona mentioned, Tom Daly was outstanding. He was in that Ireland squad during the summer, but was one of the unfortunate younger guys who didn't actually get capped. But I've no doubt, and I saw Ross Maloney, an interview with him last weekend, as another one of those players. When you come within touching distance, you see the standard that's set at international level, and you go away knowing what you have to do to bring yourself to the next level. And I think Tom Daly has benefited hugely, even though he didn't get capped over the summer. I think he's benefited hugely from being in that environment, from working with the coaches, from knowing what the expectation levels are. I think next to him, Tom Farrell was a player that we had highlighted a season or two ago, another breakthrough season for him. But then I think injury came at the wrong time. So we haven't seen a lot of him. He was outstanding as well. And again, I go back to the quality of his passing. But if Connacht are to succeed, they have to have that strength and depth that others have. But if you look, like Daly and Farrell have looked a really exciting combination. You've Bundy Aki, a Tess Lyon to come back in the next few weeks. Sammy Arnold is in that squad. Didn't get a whole lot of opportunity last year because of injury. He was a quality player, remember, with both Ulster and Munster. And you've a Peter Robb, who's another big, strong guy. So they do have that strength and depth. In terms of their attacking style, and you know what we said about Munster and the maul, the 5 forward scoring, the difference for me is Munster, when they get in that position, they stick to what they're doing, the one-out passes, the latching, the driving, whereas Connacht have a bit more variety. And I think we saw that in the first try that Tiernan O'Halloran got. That came off a maul that Connacht were stressing the Bulls line, and they almost sucked the Bulls in to trying to defend the way they would against a Munster or a Leinster. But they had options off the back of that maul, and that's all of a sudden, through brilliant hands and awareness, the space opened up. Tiernan O'Halloran scores under the post. Like, that's not something that Munster look to do that often when they're in that position.
No,
so
but
Connacht,
sorry, on that point, you know, like Connacht with the players, the centres that you mentioned, Tom Daly and Farrell, and obviously Jack Carty pulling the strings, that access of those 3 players, they look to pass the ball the whole time. What we saw from Munster, and I guess over the last couple of weeks in particular as well, and most of last season, is that, and I know you're taking Dialende and Chris Farrell out of the Munster setup now, but Rory Scannell and maybe Dan Goggin, who it was previously, and Keith Earls in the centre, they don't have that same ability to pass the ball as freely, don't? Or they don't seem to. Anyway.
Yeah, but look, it's not part of their approach in the same way that it is for Connacht. Connacht look to play to the back 3. I think Munster, you know, we've seen evidence that they're trying to do that. We saw it in the opening game against the Sharks, for example. But I think Munster were shocked with what happened to them, and you know, we might be talking about Munster later on. But basically, Munster were hit by a hammer blow in the opening 35 minutes of that game. The Sharks, all of a sudden, the first South African team that actually came to play, and we saw glimpses of what they're capable of. So Munster really had to revert to type to address an issue that they faced at that particular moment. But Connacht, as an overall style, they look to play high intensity. They look to play out of the tackle. And that is something I think that Andy Friend has been developing for some time now. The problem for Connacht, I think, or one of the problems, is given the way they want to play, and you look at their record last year, they were far more successful away from home than they were in Galway. And maybe a lot of that has to do with the weather conditions in the winter in Galway. It's not conducive to playing that way. So I think that has impacted on their home record. So they have to get the balance right in terms of, you know, sometimes you want to go out and move the ball and play out of the tackle. But if there's a gale force wind or it's lashing rain, then you have to adapt your game. So yeah, I think that's something they have to do.
It is. But, and Wes, you can make the argument that they are, when they play like that and it works, they are the best province to watch, just aesthetically, from what you're seeing on the pitch. Andy Friend has a mindset of how he wants to play, and I really admire that. And you know, and half of me kind of looks sometimes at watching the other provinces, and I kind of scratch my head and going, look, is this really what we want to be watching or want to be playing here now? Look, I know Connacht obviously, with results wise, would speak for itself, but I admire Andy Friend's approach, I have to say.
I think, like Donald said about the recruitment, like he's gone and got Papali, who had kind of, I suppose, threatened to be a very important player. Maybe his discipline and a couple of other issues let him down at times last season, but he's got Fafita now. They signed this Samoan Loosehead yesterday. You put that together with guys like Ultan Dillane, Heffernan. It's not necessarily that it's a massive pack, but they're all quite explosive guys, and they're all guys capable of generating a bit of pace and a bit of momentum in attack. And they look to generate that pace in different ways rather than through one-out runners like say some of the other provinces have been doing. And I suppose there's just a bit more innovation to how they're looking to set themselves up to allow themselves to go wide, and they're always changing the point of attack. And yeah, it's very entertaining when it works. And I suppose I don't want to be disparaging, but they're attempting to kind of overcome their limitations in an innovative way, rather than playing to type all the time. which is interesting to see and is a good endeavour from any coach.
It is interesting, and it's all, some would say that I guess it's by design, by necessity rather than design, Fiona, because typically Connacht haven't had the big pack to compete against the Toulouses or even Munsters when they come up against it as well. So Andy Friend has had to be innovative about how he approaches the game, but so be it. I mean, the result is what you're seeing now, and I'd love to see Connacht be successful with it, because I think then it might offer a different approach maybe for the rest of the provinces at times.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, when the ball sticks and they're playing that type of rugby, it's so exciting to watch, and it's brilliant. But it's trying to revert to that plan B, like Donald said, when it's not working, when it's wet, when it's windy. It's do they have the big forwards to hold on to that ball? And you could definitely see he's trying to bring in the type of players that he's able to change his game plan around at times when it's not working. And I can see him trying to do that. You saw at times in the first game that maybe they were the forwards when they were playing last weekend were holding on to the ball a little bit much. This week we saw a different game plan altogether. We saw absolute skills going wide, innovative. And it's all based on, I suppose, what Jack Carty sees in front of him and he seems to be pulling the strings as well on that. And for me, once they start getting these players in, these big ball players, Papa Lees, we spoke this new Samoan guy that's coming over. Like, we don't know much about him. I know he played a little bit in New Zealand as well. But these are the type of players you want to see in there, and it's kind of expanding that game and being able to chop and change at times when needed.
Yeah, what did you think of Munster on Saturday night, Fiona? Obviously, Donald and I were there, and the first half was surprising, really. It was almost eerily silent in Thomond Park because the crowd were saying, well, what's going on here? The Stormers playing all the rugby. Jack O'Donohue's tried kind of drag Munster back into it at the end of the first half, and then it was just a different side that came out after half time.
It was like an absolutely completely different type. Both sides were different when they came out. I thought, to be honest with you, the Stormers' line speed, Munster didn't know what to do with it in the first 30 minutes. They couldn't come to terms with it. Even the speed of play when they were getting the ball wide. I think maybe the two centres were lost at times. And I know Keith Earls was in at 13 and he hasn't played there in a while, but you could really see that they weren't able to come up and cut out that ball. And Munster, once the Stormers got in behind them, they didn't seem to know what to do with it. And I suppose for me, a defining moment of the match was when Peter O'Mahony had that try-saving tackle. And I think if that score had gone in, who knows what would have happened after that. The Stormers might have got a bit more momentum again, but definitely it was a game of two halves. I was pretty impressed with the second half. And, you have to put your hands up as a team. It mightn't have gone well, but for whatever was said in the dressing room, they definitely came out and had a bit more bite in them. And exactly that, the pack were absolutely outstanding. I thought the back row were brilliant in the second half.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that Munster pack, Donald. And when you think you have Tyke Byrne to come back into it as well, I mean, like, that's certainly the back five now. If you throw Tyke Byrne into the mix along with Snyman, who might start, you could put Byrne maybe at 6, Peter Man. Like, it's a serious Munster pack. I guess the only question is, and this is the main takeaway from the weekend, is can Munster develop more variety to their game? If the tried and trusted with the pack comes up against a pack that won't allow them that dominance, do they have the option to go elsewhere if needed?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's what they're trying. That has been the work in progress since Stephen Larkham has come in, and as I said in their opening game against the Sharks, I think there was evidence of that. Now you look at the quality of Damien de Allende. I'm not sure whether we saw the best of him when he came in. Bear in mind, a lot of the rugby that he played was played behind closed doors in a lockdown, and a Damien de Allende type player. I mean, why do they come to Munster in the first place? They see, the whole myth around Thomond Park, the big days in Europe, those massive Heineken Cup days, but they haven't had them. Just like RJ Snyman saying, he waited a year to come on to make his debut in this cauldron. There was only 10,000 people there, but the response that he has got, big players rise to big occasions. I think Peter O'Mahony said it, look, all the lip service they gave during the lockdown, that they just got on and they're focused on their game. But, he admitted it was different. Playing for Ireland, playing for Munster or Leinster in front of empty stadia, it's just not the same. And when you see what de Allende did for South Africa last weekend, I mean, I think there's a quality there that Munster haven't sort of worked out how best to use as yet. Now, Joey Carberry is an integral part of that equation. I think, again, he started 2 games in the championship so far. I think it's fair to say he's still finding his feet. Like, he's not at the level that he was prior to his injury, but he is the key element for me. Munster need to get him up to that level, because his performances at 10 is going to dictate what happens outside. You mentioned Jack Carthy, it's the same. You look at what Sexton does for Leinster. That is the key position for me. But the quality they now have up front, and the variety, I mean, they now have options. Will they play Tadhg Beirne at 6? Because you could have Klein and Sneeman in the second row. Like Thomas Ahern and Wycherley are the young guys trying to break in there. You could play Byrne in the second row and have a really good mobile. Alex Kindellan, a player that we watched in the under-20, captain of the Ireland 20s, is an outstanding player. I mean, he is the 7, I think. Even though they play him at 8, I can't understand why he hasn't been moved to 7. That's where I see his future. He's brilliant over the ball. I see Michael Hooper when I see Alex Kindellan. I think he's that type of a player. He's intelligent. And if I was Munster, I'd be fast-tracking him in that 7 jersey. So, I mean, the balance...
John Hotnett back now as well from injury.
Yeah,
he
was outstanding until he got injured. And you've also got Jason Jenkins to come in.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, he's a guy we haven't even seen yet. He's another monster. So there's no question, I think, look, they've addressed the areas that they've been deficient in. I think getting that balance in the back row, I mean, let them all shoot it out. Tadhg Beirne, Gavin Coombs, Peter O'Mahony, Jack O'Donoghue, throw them all into the mix, and it's the best man wins. But they now have options available. They can tweak the way they want to play. I do think, to be fair to Larkham, that he is making progress in that overall wide game. It's a question now, like, where is Zebo best positioned? Where is Earls best positioned? Mike Haley, you know, he had a very good season last year. So it's getting that mix right for me. And that's the challenge. The biggest worry I have now is that if Sneeman, he's going to start soon. I've no doubt he'll be outstanding. And South Africa are coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So I think he could be gone for another month or 2 months. So who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. But let's go back to Donald's, I guess, point there was that 10 is still the key position. It's the key position across all the provinces. Jack Carty, we saw what he can do, even despite a couple of mistakes. Joey Carberry still looks a long way short of his best form, and his confidence just doesn't seem to be there at the moment. And then I watched Ross Byrne on Sunday afternoon for Leinster, and he was shockingly bad. You know, just when Leinster needed somebody to take control of the game, and they did. Leinster were poor in and of themselves, but Ross Byrne, I thought, was just really below par, and it just underlines really that Johnny Sexton is still the best out half in the country by a street.
It's really changed your tune on that one,
I know. Well, I see. I guess. Look, I'm looking at, you know, Harry Burns played very little rugby. I'm a huge fan of Jack Crowley. We haven't seen him at all. It's been Ben Healy coming off the bench. I'm waiting for some young guy to grab it by the scruff of the neck, but nobody is so far. So yeah, Sexton is still the number 1 man.
I think that's been something that's jumped out at me the last 2 weeks, though, was, you know, as much as there was a lot of hype and marketing and excitement around the first couple of weeks, like, I don't know how much has actually changed certainly for any of the Irish teams. I don't know if there's been any, you know, transformation really. I think with Munster, like, we've been going on about this evolution of their attacking game for, like, you know, literally since Rassie Erasmus was there.
Yeah.
I don't know what evidence we have to base, like, this idea that they're suddenly going to change the way they play on with a South African coach and 50 South African players in the squad. So, like, they're not going to wake up and start playing like Toulouse or Connacht one of these days. It's not going to happen. So any change will be by increment. And obviously there's a huge hype about Sneeman, and he's obviously a phenomenal player, but, like, he was a sub for South Africa when they won the World Cup. Now, maybe by design, because his impact was so big. A lot of the clips people were watching online that were getting him excited before he made his debut for Munster, he was playing in Japan. Like, all Sneeman does is give you the ability to go toe-to-toe with a Will Skelton when you play La Rochelle, a Maro Toja when you play Saracens. This idea that, like, he's obviously a charismatic guy and, you know, he could have some Rocky Elsom type effect, but I don't know. I don't know what people like. What's he going to have to do for people to deem him a success? Walk on water, is it?
Okay. Well, the counter to that is that he's a phenomenally strong, powerful, skillful second row forward, the likes of which that Munster actually haven't had for the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, Billy Holland had an incredible career longevity-wise for Munster, but Billy Holland was starting big games not so recently. And you look at Sean Klein, who, again, was this monster second row, who was absolutely, I still don't know how he went.
The point I'm making is you don't bring Snyman and Jenkins into the team, 2 6'7", 6'9" South African back five forwards. That to me isn't a clear signal that the way Munster think they'll win trophies is that they're going to change the way they play.
What do you think, Donald, as a second row forward?
Well, I think, look, what we've seen, if you want to win in Europe, then you've got to be able to go toe-to-toe with the big packs in Europe. I mean, that's reality. You saw what La Rochelle did to Leinster in the semi-final. You see the size of the Toulouse pack that has been dominating in Europe. And Munster weren't that far away against Toulouse, remember. I disagree with you in terms of Snyman. Snyman, for me, I thought was at the World Cup, he was playing better rugby and was ahead of Lou Diaga. Now, Lou Diaga has just had a brilliant championship for South Africa, but I think Snyman fell into the trap. I mean, don't tell me that that Marks isn't a better hooker than Bombi Mbonambi, but he was starting on the bench. Kitsoff was ahead of where the Beast was at that stage of his career. That's just the way South Africa structured their team, and it was hugely successful for them. I mean, outside of the size and the grunt and the ball winning ability that Snyman brings, he does have this, like, he can complement. He is that second playmaker as a forward. He has unbelievable hands. And I know from speaking to Munster players who trained with him for the last 12 months, they're almost like the things he can do in training are phenomenal. But look, he's not going to turn the thing around on his own. He's part of, I think, of an evolving group who almost by definition, I mean, Craig Casey said it after the first, he was man of the match at the opening game, all of a sudden, youthful exuberance and excitement. We have to win a trophy. And it was almost, you could see the Shepherd's Hook pulling him in from the PR office straight away. By the time he got back into the dressing room, it was, well, I didn't really need to say that. So, I mean, that is the pressure that is there. So look, it's like the old Holy Grail long ago when they were striving to win that first Heineken Cup. It took forever, but the journey was almost as good as the end result. So look, it's the same. And I mean, when you're talking about evolutions and that, I think we have to speak about Ulster. I think Dan McFarland has been building Ulster slowly. I know it was Zebra that were playing against over the weekend, but they have a cohort of young players like Ethan McElroy, Nathan Doak, Dave McCann. There's 3 young fellas that we have been watching at under 20 level for the last 2 years. They look really comfortable at this level. So I think, and maybe the missing ingredient, like, will the luckiest part of the season for any Irish province be that Leone Nakarawa failed his fitness test for Ulster, and they've ended up with Dwayne Vermeulen from left field? I mean, the guy was phenomenal against against New Zealand on Saturday. Yeah. Almost, I'm not sure the new Ulster forwards coach was, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but you could almost see the excitement in his voice. He was quoted as he can't wait for Vermeulen to come into the Ulster setup to see what he can add to the coaches even, because he's at a stage of his career where he's almost like an additional coach. So I have to say, I'm really excited about the Irish provinces this year. And I do think overall, and we're talking at an early stage of the season, but there's been glimpses as well from the Welsh teams that they're a little bit more competitive. So I think we've got a very good league on our hands. And also Benetton 2 from 2. Ulster against Benetton Friday night is the game of the weekend for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it. Fiona, I recorded the Leinster game there on Sunday, and anytime I'm going to have trouble sleeping, I'm just going to knock it on. I'll be off in about 5 minutes. It was absolutely putrid stuff. Putrid.
Yeah, I know. I think I was watching it as well. I think I nearly fell asleep at one stage. It's probably, you know what, we were talking about how exciting they were last week as well, and then to just come out this week, it's mad in the space of a week how things can change. And the thing that kind of I was just waiting for them to take. I was waiting for someone to take control. You know, they had a good few senior players on there. You know, and it just didn't happen at all. I mean, Ryan Baird came on. Normally has this massive impact off the bench. I think he had 3 knock-ons in the last 15 minutes. It was just uncharacteristic errors. I mean, even I suppose the one positive was Josh van der Fleer again. I suppose seeing him getting more game time, man of the match again. But even saying that,
Levy as well, Fiona, to be fair.
Yeah. Levy came on, and that's good. It's good to see him getting game time. I mean, they're slowly building up fitness, and we were talking about that Munster back row as well. But that Leinster back row, Will Connor's coming back into that as well. There's going to be some serious competition up at Irish Camp, I think, for back row spaces. I mean, it seems to me like a lot of the guys are really performing at that high standard.
And we wanted your area of expertise. I asked Fiona Coughlin this during the match as well, but the most exciting thing for me in the whole game was Cian Healy coming on and what he did in the first scrum there. To go from loose head to tight head, you know, after 100 odd caps and you know, over a 12-year career, Fiona is quite something. And to go from the easier position to the harder position, you know, on side of the scrum. I asked Fiona, she never tried it. She said she tried it once, she'd never do it again. I don't wonder what's your thoughts on Cian's newfound career here?
Yeah, I mean, Cian always had the size. I mean, you know, for me, if someone, like in basic terms, if someone asked me the difference between a loose head and tight head, I'd say as a loose head, I generally get to attack. As a tight head, you're being attacked. And, you know, and I suppose for me, I tried it a few times as well up at, I played Spain and they threw me in there at one stage and I was absolutely back at the rate of knots because it's just, it's totally different. I mean, everything about it is different. Your chest, you're going off the other side. Everything about it is different. And for him to just, it shows what a phenomenal athlete he is to just be able to switch over like that. I mean, we know that Porter has played swapped over at 20s, had played and went back again. So he's had a good bit of experience. But for Cian Healy, it seems, and even the forwards coach in Leinster just talking about it, saying it was him who put his hand up. He said, can I go over? I want to have a go there. He saw the competition and he wanted to be that dual player. And at that age, I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, no, it is. Donald, just before we wrap it up, speaking of Leinster coaches, Dennis Leamy to Leinster, I didn't see that one coming. I said to Wes last night on the phone, geez, you think Munster would have found a spot for him somewhere? But obviously, that's the job he's been offered. How do you think he'll do?
Oh, listen, I have huge time for Dennis Leamy, and we've been tracking his, just even on a club scene down here. We were trying to attract Dennis into Cork about 3 years ago. He was doing a great job with his own club. He's been on the radar for some time, but he's been busy. He had a farm that he was running as well. But I think he's concentrating more on the rugby side of it now. I mean, Leinster, well, they brought him into the development area first. Then he was involved as part of that Ireland under-20 management setup. A lot of positive reports in terms of the input and the impact that he has had. I mean, Leamy was a phenomenal player. I always remember I met Graham Henry and the New Zealand management for dinner the night before Ireland played New Zealand, maybe 10 years ago in Dublin. And the only player they spoke about before the match was Leamy. Like, he was the one player that they were worried about the following day. Like, they really saw him. Like, New Zealand pride themselves in the quality of their back rows. He was the one guy that they would see getting into their back row. Right. He's a very understated guy, but he's a very sharp individual. I think Leinster, again, they kind of sucked him into their system first, had a look at him by sort of feeding him into their underage teams, working with their academy lads. They got very positive reports back through the under-20 setup. I think he's a brilliant, like Hugh Hogan had been, did a great job there. And that whole contact area, the breakdown is such an when I see teams, the amount of work they put into their set piece, their scrum, their line out, their maul, and we don't seem to put in the same amount of work in that breakdown area, the specialist area. It was something that Joe Schmidt concentrated massively on. You couldn't play on the wing for Ireland if you didn't know how to present the ball properly in the breakdown. And it's that attention to detail, and given, you know, just how competitive the breakdown area is, I think a breakdown coach is hugely influential. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the area, the contact area, I think, is the area that Dennis is going into. Listen, I've no doubt he'll be an outstanding success. He's, you know, a Munster. He hasn't been involved with Munster, I don't think, at any stage. No. So, I mean, you take your opportunities when they arise. And I think for him to get the opportunity to work with somebody like Stuart Lancaster, Robin McBride, Leo himself, I think it's a brilliant learning and a great next step for Leamy because he has a lot to offer.
Absolutely, yeah, and it'd be interesting to see the impact that he makes. Domestically, the cookies are flying at Wes, and he must be delighted. Cork Con got their asses handed them by Lansdowne at the weekend. Sure, life is wonderful in Limerick, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that five out of 6 for the Limerick clubs. I think the weekend. I think Shannon were beaten last minute.
By Wesley.
Yes, it's great that the highlights of all the games are going up online now.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of like kind of marketing, a bit of hoopla around the return of it. I mean, in fairness, they had 18 months to come up with that strategy, so it's the least you'd expect. But brilliant to be back recreationally for people. And like I think Donald touched on it last week. Like there's no URC games during the international windows, so that natural chance for rotation is gone there. There's no secondary competition in terms of an A competition at the minute. Like there's a huge chance for the integration of professional players back into clubs in some capacity this season. I know it happened in fits and starts last week, but I'd love to see it happen in a coherent way where, like, if you're number 35 in your provincial squad and you know the chance of you playing in the next 2 or 3 match days is fairly slim, but you know there's a full AIL program during November, let the guys go back and train with the club as well in some capacity. I know they can't do it full time, but make them an actual part of that team and that squad rather than just guys dipping in and out, sporadically, and flag that to the public that this is where you are going to see those players and there is a huge relevance to this competition. Let's really build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Big
yeah, to be fair, just on that point, there were a lot of academy stroke development players, if you want to call them, released back into clubland last week, and it did add a bit of quality. Yes, we were beaten in the last second by Lansdowne.
By one of your own as well.
Michael Kiernan's son.
Your own fella, yeah.
Jesus, I couldn't believe it. I had a quick chat with Peter about 5 minutes before the match. I had to leave actually about 4 minutes to go because I was going to Limerick for the Munster match, and I could hear the cheer as I was pulling out. Peter O'Malley's dad, John, was in the car with me, and the two of us looked at each other and said, "Oh shit!" And then when I heard it was a Kiernan, that was even worse. But I tell you, it was a brilliant pre-match lunch back in Lansdowne. A lot of faces we hadn't seen for such a long time. Clubland needs this. I mean, even Lansdowne, to be fair, they had a minute's silence for Paul Ingalls, one of their former players who had passed away, a former president. But, we're all seeing it in Clubland, the amount of club stalwarts over the last 18 months who've passed away. And, it was actually very poignant being back in Clubland. As you mentioned, we have the Cookies coming to Cork on Saturday. No doubt they'll travel in strength. They've had a great start to the season, but our lunch is sold out, and that's what clubs are about. Do you know what I mean? There is that community element there, and look, it's great. My feeling with the All Ireland League: the more these guys can be filtered back into it, and it looks as if, I mean, the Celtic Cup or A games, there isn't going to be as many this year. So for once, the provinces are a little bit more reliant on the clubs, and they're actually now coming to us to say, "Well, look, can we fill them in here?" Which is great.
To be fair, Donald, it's great that the Cork public can rally behind rugby down there with the huge disappointments they've had in other sports over the last few months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ireland's a busted flush, like they may as well forget about that.
They're a resilient bunch in Cork. I wouldn't be worried about their self-confidence anyway. Fiona, I am no joy for you 2 in a row. Ballincollig, you lost to Cook at the weekend, but just thank your lucky stars you weren't coaching Wicklow, who lost 142-0 to Railway. And I think all the players have just decided that's enough for rugby. They're going to play something else now, and I wouldn't blame them.
I know, and it's terrible. I think I wasn't at the match. I think someone said that some of Railway were taking drop goals to speed up the play as well, so they could get a few more in them. So yeah, no, it wasn't great result for Wicklow. I'm sure you'd be at home in your bed for a while after that one, but look, that's the nature. There's a big disparity between the top 4, and I think maybe it kind of the rest maybe. So I'm hoping, over the next few years with my own team, I can build them up a little bit as well. But definitely big gap there, 142-0. God.
Oh, geez, you're obviously on the long-term contract with Ballincollig.
The big bucks, Donald. The big bucks.
Exactly. A 3-year plan.
I think Wicklow have blown the food budget on getting 12 psychologists down to deal with the 142 loss there at Railway of the weekend. So listen, girls, just keep at it, and hopefully it manages to turn. Well, thanks to Donal, to Fiona, and to Wes. We have more rugby action this weekend live on RT with Leinster against Zebre and Munster against the Scarlets on Sunday. So back-to-back games. I hope you can tune in for that, and we'll talk to you next week.
The RTE Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury, proud official kit suppliers to the Irish men and women's rugby teams.